Hi everyone, welcome to our community special with our Cyber Risk Meetup. So my name is Shamane Tan. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Sekuro. I'm also the founder of Cyber Risk Meetup. And this is a huge welcome to all of you who are joining us here. And for those who recall, Cyber Risk Meetup used to meet up once every quarter, either in person or virtually. So our last gathering was in Perth just last month. And we're looking to do a new one in Adelaide. So how many of you here have attended any of our meetups before? Feel free to put that in the chat group. And I'm just so happy to welcome everyone for the All Cyber special. So today I'm pleased to bring back a Cyber Risk Meetup guest favorite, Dan Lohrmann, who's all the way from the US. He's the former Chief Security Officer for the state of Michigan. And this will be followed also after by our panel segment, where we will get to hear from Dan together with the CISO at Hollard Insurance, Grae Meyer-Gleaves, and the CEO at Sekuro, Robert McAdam. But before that, for our keynote, we have Dan Lohrmann, who will be sharing insights with us from his latest book, Cyber Mayday and the Day After. And I'm really, really excited because I have the pleasure to co-author this with him as well. But in today's keynote, Dan will be addressing on how our cyber leaders can remain competitive in preparing for Cyber Mayday and also recovering on the day after. And this is the very first time that he is preparing this presentation and everyone is hearing this for the first time. So you're in for a treat. Handing it over to you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Shamane. It is wonderful to be with you all today. And it is wonderful to be a co-author with Shamane, who's just a marvelous expert in the cyber field, but equally fun to work with and just so well connected around the world. A really great author. And we are so excited that the book is launching November 1st. It's shipping and it's going to be in bookstores around the world in mid-November. And the book has got just a wide variety of different topics. We're only just going to touch on pieces of it today, just the beginning of the topics. But really, it is a leader's guide to preparing, managing, and recovering from inevitable business disruption. So there's really three parts. We know what to do before an emergency, cyber emergency, what to do during, and then what to do after. But what we really want to focus on in the next 25 minutes before we have the panel is these three topics, is really thinking about cyber disruption and really what the different challenges are that we're facing in the world today, both in the US, in Asia, in Australia. Obviously, some similar challenges that we're facing globally. So some headlines, examples, what global leaders are saying on cyber, just teeing up the topic. Most of you know this, but just giving you some examples of some of the really dramatic changes we've been seeing in 2021. One eye-opening story example from the book, some key takeaways. We're going to wrap this section up with 5 key takeaways from chapter 1, some final thoughts, and then we're going to go to a discussion panel, as Shamane mentioned, with the experts to discuss that. But I want to start off with this little picture, in case you're wondering where I'm coming from. Sorry, the back and forth. I monitor lightness here, but I'm actually in Michigan. So you see the Great Lakes there in Michigan, and you basically we hold our hands up and go like this. You can actually see this in the little diagram here of Michigan. I'm right there in the center of Michigan, between the Great Lakes. And you can see the northern part of Michigan there at the top. But I was Michigan government. I was a lot of the stories are from Michigan government, but from government around the United States and all over the world, and also private sector. So we have a mix of public, private sector stories. The organization I ran, 52,000 state employees, comprehensive support for over 800 critical applications, 5,600 desktops, and 1,300 telecom locations. Just a little bit of background on myself. I started my career at the National Security Agency. I was in England with Lockheed and Mantech for 7 years in the 90s, and then 17 years in Michigan government before my 7 years with Security Mentor. I want to start off with some of these global threats that we're seeing right now, from SolarWinds last year to the Colonial Pipeline attacks we saw in the United States. Ransomware hitting governments all over the USA for sure, but really all over the world. We're going to give some examples of that. And then right there in Australia, certainly Channel 9 cyber attacks disrupt live broadcast in Australia. And the headlines go on and on and on. We're seeing multiple headlines every day that are hitting us. And these are just some of the staggering numbers we saw in 2019 and 2020. 2019, pre-COVID, pre the pandemic, we were really seeing some dramatic changes. 1,000 local government entities hit with ransomware here in the United States. There's just some of the organizations you can see there: City of Baltimore, Augustana, Tallahassee, Florida, City of Albany, New York. Estimated cost of these incidents were $7.5 billion. 2/3 of all known ransomware attacks in the U.S. went after government entities in 2019. 500 schools were hit by ransomware. But then in 2020, the scope even increased. The average ransom paid was about 51,000 US dollars. And that went way up, as you're going to see, in 2021. The numbers just kept going up and up and up. The amount demanded by New Bedford was 5.3 million US dollars. 1,700 incidents, 70% increase in 2020. And then this headline, we're seeing different numbers by different organizations saying globally ransomware attacks grew by 485% in 2020. This is talked about one of the examples in Bitdefender's report, and they talked about the reasons for that. But certainly, as we talked about, in COVID and the pandemic, moving to a digital transformation that we're seeing in many enterprises, more and more things going online. Paper processes were ended in many examples, and we had to do things online, but the attackers took advantage of that and have actually seen more and more attacks and more challenges that we faced. So just in the intro to the book, one of the things I just want to mention is some of the headline quotes as we see an explosion in online use. I'm able to be in this event with you, which is a real honor for me to be talking to you in Australia and around the world from the United States. So an explosion in the digital use and the online use in the virtual world, but also an explosion in the number of attacks that have happened at the same time. So here are just a few of the quotes I want to read to you from the beginning of the book, the intro, from President Joe Biden here. We've elevated the status of cyber issues within our government. President Biden said in a national security speech at the State Department at the beginning of his presidency, we are launching an urgent initiative to improve our capabilities, readiness, and resilience in cyberspace. And then the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, when he was being interviewed on 60 Minutes, said this when he was talking about the cyber risks that we're facing. What are those risks? All different kinds. I mean, there are scenarios in which a large payment utility, for example, breaks down and the payment systems can't work. Payments can't be completed. There are scenarios in which large financial institutions lose the ability to track payments, that is making large transactions globally. Things like that, where you would have a part of a financial system come to a halt, or even a broad part of the financial system collapsing. Powell continued, and so we spend so much time and energy and money guarding against these things, testing against these things. These are cyber attacks every day on all major financial institutions. Then the SolarWinds CEO, Sudhakar Ramakrishna, said this about after the SolarWinds attack hit beginning of this year. We believe that the entire software industry should be concerned about the nation state attacks, as the methodologies and approaches that the threat actors use can be replicated to impact software and hardware products from any company. And these are not just SolarWinds specific vulnerabilities. Two more I want to read. FireEye CEO Kevin Mandia, who was attacked and really kind of revealed to the world how they had been attacked with beginning of the SolarWinds hit. Said this: based on the knowledge gained through our years of experience, and they had 17 years of data that they have looked at different scenarios and different attack vectors. Responding to cyber incidents, we concluded that we were witnessing an attack by a nation with a top-tier offensive capabilities. This attack was different from the multitude of incidents to which we responded throughout the years. The attackers tailored their capabilities specifically to target and attack our company and other victims. They operated clandestine methods that counter security tools and forensic examination. They also operated with both constraint and focus, targeting specific information, specific people, as if collecting requirements. They did not perform actions that were indiscriminate. They did not appear to go on a fishing expedition. They were going after specific companies. And then Chris DeRusha, the federal head of cybersecurity for the US. So we are at a crossroads in the nation and the world's cybersecurity. SolarWinds incident exposed our gaps and capabilities. And this is not just in the federal government space, but in the most mature and well-resourced companies of the world. And lastly, your Prime Minister right there in Australia said this, Scott Morrison, based on advice provided to me by our cyber experts, Australian organizations are currently being targeted by sophisticated state-based cyber actors. This activity is targeting Australian organizations across a range of sectors, including all levels of government, industry, political organizations, education, health, central service providers, and operators of critical infrastructure. So I could go on and on and on, but the attacks are happening. Experts at the highest levels of business and government are recognizing that this is a change. And that's really what we talk about in the book. It's true stories. It's a mix of true stories, interesting what happens behind the scenes, business leaders, security leaders, finance leaders, what happened when and then also checklists. What can you do to really help yourself? And in the beginning, we start off in chapter 1, we talk about this question, starting with the unknowns or not. So, if you had a time machine and you could go back and you could think, what would I do differently in the beginning of this incident? What would I do in the middle of the incident? What would I do after the incident? How could I change? And one of the questions is, do you even want to know? There are experts we've seen in examples where people just want to put in their blinders. They don't want to know, really what's going on. So it's like, I don't know. I can't. I don't have to report on it. I don't have to. You don't have to let people know. Most people do want to know, but there are a lot of leaders that in some cases don't want to know. But how hard are you really looking? Do you really do risk assessments? Do you do the things to constantly be monitoring for attacks that are happening? What is your perspective? And I want to share one story that actually came from Shamane, and she's got so many stories and so many great contacts. And so this was one story that she interviewed with your cyber meetups around the world with the FBI. So I just want to read one section of one really compelling early story in the book that talks about this compelling challenge we face. The FBI officer was Todd Carroll, a former 20-year FBI cyber intelligence leader. And he was talking about one case in which they used Cyber Angel's data leak detection technology. And in this case, they performed a search and monitoring on keywords related to airport security. They detected nearly 10,000 servers that were publicly available, on which over 400 blueprints of airport worldwide were identified, sitting on unprotected third-party connected devices or in misconfigured cloud storage. Some of these blueprints were extremely detailed, including the location and angle of the security cameras, revealing which were motion activated or had facial recognition capabilities, and even precise information on how to access and take control of them. In addition, these blueprints contain the location of the detention rooms that are hidden from the public, runways, and the position of fuel lines from the tanks leading to the runways where fuel is pumped into the wings of the aircraft. There were blank signed templates of security application access forms, if compromised would have allowed access to the airport facilities. There were also completed security badge application forms with official stamps and signatures, and over 300 files describing safety procedures and policies. Those procedures including instructions on how to bypass the whole security system and how to deactivate it. There were also identified details of air marshals, departure dates and arrival dates, as well as a list of weapons that allowed to carry on planes. Such intricate information can easily serve as a blueprint for a terrorist attack. And this is the last part, which is kind of the most alarming to me. The frightening part of all this is that the data was found on third-party servers in many countries, including the United States, France, the UK, India, Spain, and others. It was fortunate the findings were reported to the impacted organizations in time. The FBI and Interpol worked on closing the thousands of open servers around the globe. So knowing, putting your blinders on is not going to solve that kind of a situation. Knowing what's going on in your networks, where your data is, what's vulnerable, having tests, having, tabletop exercises, and we go through a lot of that, and really taking steps in the early days is so important. I want to go over 5 of the recommendations that are really takeaways from chapter 1. Just again, this is just to kind of whet your appetite for what we cover. But this is a CSO of Singapore Land Transport Authority. He highlighted 3 top takeaways for business owners, board directors, and executives. And then we also have 2 takeaways from Mark Weatherford and Deb Snyder, who are CISOs and security leaders in the United States. And those are the final 2. So takeaway number 1 that we want to mention is the world will never be immune from cyber attacks. That this is something that's really escalating. Protections hopefully are getting better, but solutions require people, process, and technology. Even if you have the best technology, you've got to have the right people on the job, and especially the processes that are repeatable over and over and over again. And that's a theme that's given out in many of the stories throughout the book, and how if you fall down in the process and the people side, it can also lead to data breaches and to ransomware attacks and other things. CISO qualities are really important, and reporting structure, your governance, who reports to who, how it's organized is really, really key. And he walks through examples of that. But the cyber attacks are escalating, and we will not be immune from them. Takeaway number 2 is cybersecurity is a business risk issue, which is really the name of your group. It's not just an IT issue. Supply chain attacks are opening eyes now. We're seeing that around the world. Is a challenge, certainly in all of critical infrastructure sectors. It's not just about money, and certainly it is about money and time, but it's also bringing down critical infrastructures like the Colonial Pipeline, like JBS Meats in the United States, and causing gas lines in the United States, for example, damaging downstream consequences. You see the quote there that this is something that is ongoing, and it's continuing to affect all parts of the business. So all parts of the business need to be involved in the solution. This is not just an IT issue. Number 3, the double-edged sword of zero trust. So zero trust, your whole talks, I'm sure you've had them this week, just on zero trust and the importance of it. A big supporter of zero trust. It's a really important concept. A lot of great articles on how zero trust really is kind of the new normal and required in many U.S. government organizations now. But CXOs, CSOs, CXOs, CEOs need to understand zero trust. But they also need to understand that there's going to be times when it could create issues for you. So never trust, always verify can hinder incident response. So for the example he gives, cyber response playbooks often require trusting that a patch could be applied or a service that cannot be verified is actually implemented during an emergency. So what are you going to do in your playbooks in those situations? You must act and adapt based on best information available and the priorities and more. So really knowing, zero trust architectures are great and they need to be implemented, but they also need to be adapted for cyber incidents and especially for emergencies, and know how you're going to react, testing patches, testing solutions, and how that's going to work. A 4th one was from Mark Weatherford, who was Undersecretary for Department of Homeland Security, CSO in many states in California, and he's worked for many private sector companies now. He's a good friend of mine. He's talked about picking the right person to lead the effort. He tells a story. I'll just give you a short version of it. But in California government, when he was a statewide CISO, and he was working with all the different agencies, which is very decentralized in California. And in one case, there was an example where he was supposed to be helping the teams pick the CISOs for the individual agencies and individual business units. As it turned out, in one case, someone was hired and he didn't really know why he was not included in the process. When he met with the individual, something seemed to be wrong, seemed to be just the person was very kind and very professional, but they just didn't seem to have a lot of knowledge. It turns out they had not done a background check on this individual, that they had not vetted his references, they had not looked at his CV and really seen his background. Turns out the person had just been released from prison and had a criminal record and really had no experience as a CISO. So obviously that was a really bit of an embarrassing situation, but Mark was talking about the importance of really making sure you have the right person leading the effort and you go through the right processes. And by the way, we're going to talk more about hiring and that whole thing during the panel in a few moments. And then fifth takeaway, act and adjust with resilience when cyber situation evolves. In New York State, Deb Snyder, who was CISO there, talked about all the different situations and how they kind of grew, and they learned from one school district to another local unit of government to the state units of government, and how they would have to adapt. And they thought they had their arms around it, and then in many cases it snowballed, and all of a sudden they had to do many remediations and responses to cyber incidents at the same time. They didn't have the resources to do that. So being able to prepare and practice with exercises, knowing the roles and responsibilities, who you're going to call, having the communications in place, remaining resilient as circumstances change, and then being able to adapt to the new situations and scenarios. And again, examples of that in the stories that we go over. So being ready that, obviously just because you were ready today, not necessarily going to be ready tomorrow. So here's a quick recap of those different areas and some solutions that are listed. We'll make this available to you so you can have these slides. And I'll certainly get these to Shamane so you guys can share these on your portal. But there's different takeaways, different solutions to help you address each of those individual areas. I want to wrap up with one final thought, and we want to jump over to a panel. But don't allow fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, to dominate your cybersecurity program. I think this comes across in a lot of the different stories that CISOs and security leaders need to be enablers of the business. And there's no better way to do that than in an emergency. And we talk about cyber emergencies and, term Cyber Mayday. But really, it could be in all hazards. One of the big articles that just came out literally this week in the U.S. was talking about how in natural disasters, fires, floods, tornadoes, any kind of natural disaster, there also are cyber components to that. And in some cases, there could be a blended threat. So when there's a hurricane or a natural disaster or fire, sometimes bad actors will use that to actually attack systems. So, security pros need to be in there, be proactive, and be enablers, not just disablers, not just saying no, but here's how we can move the business forward in this risk environment. So not just being really a FUD. I think we shared that story with Shamane in an earlier segment. You can go back and watch that. I almost lost my job because I had opposed Wi-Fi in state government 20 years ago. But really learned I needed to get to yes, do it securely, and then the same with cloud, same with Internet of Things and other devices. Get to solutions that'll really work, and that's really an important piece of all of this. And the whole story and the whole book is really how you can be an enabler and a positive influence on the business. So with that, I want to wrap it up here and bring Shamane back and just say the book is available. Shamane Tan is my co-author. We're kind of 50-50 and really both have stories from around the world, certainly Australia and Asia, but all over the United States. And we'd love to have you, read our book and engage in this important topic. And I know there's going to be a lot more in the future on this. But it certainly is a important issue in our 21st century as we move into 2022. The number of attacks is just growing. This is not something that you can just assume, we're not going to get attacked. We're not going to get hacked. There will be inevitable business disruption. So really something we all need to be preparing for. So with that, I'd like to hand it back over to Shamane and we can go to the panel discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. So I really love how you shared the stories, and I enjoyed seeing how the book came to life in a keynote format. So you've covered quite a few key cyber attack takeaways, and in our panel now, we will be diving further into and explore about the current cyber market demands, and also look at different ways that our current workforce can level up and remain competitive. So I'm really excited about this panel. Just welcoming now Grae Meyer-Gleaves, who is joining us. He is the CISO at Hollard Insurance. And I also have Rob McAdam that you will be seeing now, who is the CEO at Sekuro. And then we are inviting Dan Lohrmann back again to join us at the panel. So to the rest of the listeners, along the way, if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat box. I will be looking at it as well, and then we will try to address as many as possible. So this is a good opportunity to take as much advantage of the panel as possible. So we'll kick it off first with Grae. If you can share, what are the different cyber market demands that you have been seeing at the moment, especially in today's context?
Yeah, look, I think, in terms of demand around people, that's probably becoming the most challenging area that I've seen certainly in my whole career. And that's certainly finding the skills, the experience and the knowledge, or even just finding people that we could start developing that skills and knowledge with. I mean, where I see things from a, people process technology side is, if you look back 20 years ago, there was very few technologies to actually choose, right? That's when firewalls were first starting out. Now, when you look at the marketplace, there's lots of technology available to help an organization. But when it comes down to the people part, I think as an industry, we've got to the point where we're really, really struggling. And, we need to make some more efforts around attracting people to IT and in particular cybersecurity. I think we need to lift some of the barriers of entry that are currently sitting there. And, I'll probably mention that a little bit later as well, because, that's an area I'm passionate about. But certainly, we're hearing about in the US, the Great Resignation. I think parts of that's already started in Australia through the IT sector. And certainly, from what I'm hearing, it's starting to happen more and more within the cyber side as well. So I think our biggest challenge over the coming years is not only going to be the threats and the threat actors that are out there, but it's really going to be about getting good people, being able to develop people and, having, at the end of the day, the human resources out there to help protect organizations.
Thanks for that, Grae. And perhaps, Rob, if you can jump in and talk a bit more about, what are you seeing, especially from a COVID's perspective? And, now that we're coming out of that lockdown, what are you seeing are the changes?
The core changes that I'm seeing is that there's a stronger focus on governance. I think more so because the governments of the world have seen the risk that is cybersecurity, and therefore governance frameworks around that. And the second part is probably to Grae's point is that the amount of technology that's now available, a lot of the problems are solved, and it's the integration of those technologies and then mapping that to the governance frameworks that are required to be able to bid, compete, or provide services to their particular clients. So mapping out those governance and the integration of technologies from a consulting perspective is extremely busy post-COVID.
Thanks, Rob. And Dan, would you like to add in from a US perspective? What is it like looking from the other side of the world?
Absolutely. Well, and I think these guys nailed it. I would just add that true story. I just, I was talking to CISOs every day of the week, and I had lunch with one. COVID is actually picking up. It's getting a little bit more opened up in the United States here lately. So we're able to do lunches and some live events. We've done a couple live events in the last couple of weeks. But as I'm talking to CISOs around the country and had lunch with one government leader, they had 20 some people in their team. They had lost 4 of their top 8 leaders. They call them thought leaders, but people in their team. And then they had 20. They call it the 20 top people. They said they lost 10 since the beginning of this year. So it's really scary to some organizations. It's like, how can we implement the projects? How can we do what we need to do? We know maybe if you have a good plan, you have a good roadmap, but they just don't have the staff to be able to bring them in. And I will tell you that I know several companies that are hiring people in Australia, so from the United States that are actually competing with some of the people here today. So and part of that's following the sun. Be able to do like 2 12-hour shifts. USA, then Australia or Asia, and that kind of thing. But it's a very, very hot market. We're seeing it in other areas besides technology, but cybersecurity is especially acute, and it's really, really hard right now.
Yes, there's definitely a lot going on as well. And, we have covered like from a cyber market demands point of view, there is quite a huge variety of challenges that we are seeing as well. And we will go into more details about strategies to help uplift that in a bit. But Grae, we had a session before this, and then, everyone is just so passionate about it. There's a lot of good suggestions. You'll never have enough time to talk about it. But Grae, I wanted to ask you a bit more about, the gaps. Perhaps if you can just also talk about like the other gaps that you are identifying as you, especially like if you look at your company from an end user point of view, there are different sub brands. So what are the other gaps you are seeing?
Yeah, look, I think, from cloud is having, really, I think the most fundamental impact on organizations right now. I mean, we've talked about it for years, but I think in the last few years, there's definitely been that mass migration to the SaaS end, whereas really everyone was in the infrastructure and the platform end in the past. And, we've gradually migrated there. And that's really shifted the type of skills that you need in an in-house IT shop versus, I guess, what you would see in other parts of the industry. And what I mean by that is, as a customer, and particularly in cybersecurity, we look less now for people who are going to run firewalls or look after antivirus and things like that. These are sort of services that have become highly commoditized, and they're offered by big service providers. So what you see is a lot of those engineering folks that work in that network engineering space have really shifted over to the service providers and less so in the customer side. But the sort of skills that you need now in a modern organization, and financial services is one where it's particularly important in Australia due to regulation, is that it's much more around the risk mindset. It's much more about working close with the business or all your different business units. It's more about now understanding a lot more about the business processes that they undertake, and being able to do those realistic threat and risk assessments about the activities that are going on, and then being able to still have a bit of that technical knowledge to also address some of those issues. So it's becoming a much closer relationship than, hey, it's IT, call the service desk, right? Nowadays, it's much more about that partnership and engagement. So really that requires a different set of skills. It requires, a different style and behavior by some of the folks. And it really, requires a different level of thinking, because, when you look at things technical, and I came from a technical background as well, right? It's really easy to walk into a room and start talking about protocols and ports and all that sort of stuff, and then watch all the eyes glaze over and no one's interested, right? I mean, you don't go out there and talk to your business units about that sort of thing. But even in IT, you're having less of that conversation yourself as well. So we're seeing a real shift, in where people are moving to and where those skills are required. So I think a tough one for us as a customer more and more is also just the expense as well. I mean, with salaries rapidly increasing with this skills drain at the moment too, it puts organisations under enormous financial pressure, and I'm sure the service providers, vendors, and manufacturers are all experiencing the same.
Shamane, I've just got a question for Grae. I know it's not following the format, but I would think that a lot of your job now is actually dealing with third parties, and as in delivering those services. And you would previously have had a team that would do that, but now because of the requirements of whatever it is that the strategy is, you need to be able to engage third parties. And I guess really the question which I've got is around having those third parties map back to the business strategy which you have, and I'm thinking about the skills which you would need as a customer to make sure that someone who has their service that they actually have, and they've got their strategies of how they deliver it to n number of clients, and then what you need from that service provider, and making sure that your strategy is followed. I actually, just thinking about it out loud, I actually think part of the skill set now of what you would be dealing with would actually be a lot more around third party, because there is that skill shortage, and it's very hard to be able to source internally. That's absolutely definitely true, because more and more you are dependent on those different third parties, and there's no doubt that supply chains are complex for most industries, but in an insurance business as well, you've got quite a big supply chain out there to look after your customers, and that's when someone makes a claim. Doing the policy side is pretty easy, but once someone needs to make a claim, then you've got everything, say, in an insurance company, from smash repairers for vehicles. You've got assessors that go out there and look at things. You've got investigators that might need to look at the situation, and insurance as an industry is a heavy user of third parties, and all of those third parties represent different levels of risk. Now, of course, there's some of the traditional ones. If you've got a smash repairer, of course you want them to be a safe repairer and making sure that all those repairs are safe for a customer.
But at the same time, that third party is now handling information that your customer expects, you know, say us as an organization to look after and protect, because, you know, we've sent that customer out to that particular third party. So, you know, it's becoming not uncommon for most of the colleagues that I speak to in the insurance sector to be managing 300 to 500 third parties from a cybersecurity point of view, which means, you know, being able to risk assess them, being able to make sure that you're asking the right questions to understand what the risk profile is in those particular areas. And it's less technical. You know, you're not going to call up a smash repair business and ask them questions, you know, deep technical questions, or send them an ISO 27001 assessment out there, right? Because it's a, you know, it could be a mum and dad business, but sometimes they're big operations as well. So really what I'm saying there is, you know, when it comes to the customer side, you are needing more of those business type skills. You now need to be able to read contracts. You need to keep up with the regulations that are out there, you know, CPS 234 from APRA. You know, that's a big one for us as a financial services industry player, because we're expected to, as part of the regulation, to do third-party assessments. However, that's just good practice anyway. I mean, all of us in security have been saying that for years, right? So, you know, I wouldn't be opposed to any more, you know, more regulation around that in every sector. But, you know, it is changing the sort of skills that you need. So, you know, for us as an internal organization and many others, having internal, say, pen testing skills is sometimes a necessity, but generally you go out and you use your third-party service providers to do that, because they can provide it at volume, they can provide it at scale, and they're also the ones that can really develop that level of expertise. So really what I'm finding is, you know, we very much focus on what do we need to do as a core security part of the business, and what can we use third parties to do for us that's going to give us, you know, the best quality and the best outcomes, right? So it's not always about cost. I mean, you know, in the past, you know, the horrid term outsourcing was out there, and, you know, and managed services and things like that. So, and a lot of those were driven by cost decisions, but not these days. I mean, when we deal with third parties, we're looking at quality, okay? And that's important. So yeah, the skills are different. There's no doubt about that. And I think, you know, we as an industry are seeing, I guess, a segregation in those skills, you know, where engineering skills are landing, you know, versus where risk management skills are landing, and then, you know, throughout all the different disciplines.
Yeah, we have covered quite a bit in terms of, like, first of all, we need to have diversity in thinking, diversity in backgrounds, so that, you know, it all has a different part to play, right, as part of the ecosystem. At the same time, the ecosystem has different demands as well, and it's about, there are many different players out there. And, you know, Grae, you mentioned it's really about understanding what's applicable and what's relevant to the different business units or different business model, and making sure it aligns accordingly. So that's quite a lot to think about. If we were to now spend a bit more time thinking about, like, the strategy, right, and look at other strategies that's been out there that's been helping to uplift our current workforce. Maybe I'll just go back to Dan a bit. If you can share if there are some examples you're seeing in the US.
Sure, thanks, Shamane. And I totally agree with Grae's assessment of, you know, the ability to manage contracts, the ability to manage vendors, and how do you do that, and how do you know if your provider is providing a good service, and you know, that's a skill that you know, there's a whole career path just in that. I know my background in NSA was a lot in that, so it's a challenge. But you're right, it's a shifting environment. But as far as cyber skills, I mean, just two quick strategies I just want to mention real quick. And one is, you know, I'm seeing more and more organizations looking at cross training across different groups, and so you know, basically looking at maybe someone who was a system administrator, someone who was on the help desk, or maybe a tier 2 help desk, someone who, and so looking across their own organizations, because they're having such a hard time getting people outside, and maybe they already know the culture of the company, maybe they're already working well with different business units. So trying to bring some of those people in and cross train across, you know, bring them in from other parts of your government, other parts of your private sector company, small, medium, large business. I'm seeing that be effective in a wide variety. In some cases, they're lowering the requirements. So, do I have to have a CISSP? Do I have to have certain certifications and things? And that may need to be adjusted. But I think that's one strategy. And then the other one, Grae and Robert just did a really good job describing it. Is bringing in third-party managed service providers, staff augmentation, and but the ability. One thing I just want to highlight. Even when you do that and saying, these kind of roles, we're just going to outsource. If you have a cyber emergency, the talk we just had earlier, if you have a ransomware attack, if you have a data breach, all these different groups have to work together. So, tabletop exercises, really working together as one team and really making sure that you're thinking about it, the playbook, it's all one team. So, wherever you get the players from, you're all one team. It's all hands on deck when something like a ransomware attack hits or other type of cyber or any kind of incidents, quite frankly. So really, it's really important how you integrate that and how you work together.
Thanks for sharing that, Dan. And I want to go to Rob. I hear you have a really good story to share about from Israel. If you want to share that with the rest of the audience.
Yeah, some of our staff, part of the school curriculum has cybersecurity, and I look at the skills development that we have here in Australia. So coming out of COVID, but actually prior to COVID, we had a fairly heavy reliance on immigration, as in the quality of life in Australia was attracted people, and we were able to get a volume of people to be able to resource the cybersecurity industry. And Grae and I were having a chat around, first off, what was done in Israel and how that's part of the curriculum at high school, and the expediting of cybersecurity skills at that from basically beginning of high school age, and by the end of your year 12. You've done the equivalent of your university degree in cybersecurity because it's been stretched over a number of years. Grae and I were having a chat, and he was informing me about some strategies that we have here in Australia, which I thought was actually really important for the audience. Grae, are you able to jump in here with what you were able to tell me last week?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things I think we need to do, and we're starting to see already start to happen in certain parts or certain sectors, is we need to change or lower the entry bar to come into cyber as a profession. So I think we need to start thinking about cybersecurity as not only a profession, but also a trade. And let me give you an example of this. So, at your house, an electrician comes around, right? So your electrician is a tradesperson. They've generally done some sort of 3 or 4 year apprenticeship. They've blended that with, on-the-job training. They're out there doing the hands-on. They're really, the coalface of, the electrical industry. Whether it's a new building or fixing a problem. Sitting behind the scenes to that are electrical engineers. These are the ones who go and design the electrical systems for a business. They've usually, they've gone through university, they're certified, within their discipline, and there's usually a certification body that's applicable. And, the same happens for you. You've got plumbers, but then you've got hydraulic engineers, and, we've got architects, and then we've got building engineers versus the guys that are pouring the concrete out there, right? So I think something that we've done over the years is set the bar too high. And so what I'm trying to say there is we've got to question, do we really need someone to go to university for 4 years to come out and do some of the practical, sides and skills? And I think for a lot of Australians now, that means you're going to have to get a really high market school to be able to get entry into our universities and be part of those programs. So I think we've got to broaden now so that, we're giving much more, in terms of diversity for options, regardless of your socio-economic status or sex or anything like that, so that we can bring people in. And, an example I gave the other day is the Australian Army now has cybersecurity as a trade within the Corps of Signals. If you jump on the Defence Gov site in the recruiting area, type in cybersecurity, you will see they've actually got a trade. They're taking people now coming out of high school, to come in and learn a trade and a profession. So we as an industry now need to start thinking about that as well. Have we set the entry bar way too high that we've really just eliminated our opportunity for a lot of people? So I think we need to start thinking of it as a trade and a professional. Now, a trade is always a pathway to a profession. An electrician can one day become an electrical engineer if they want to, or be happy to do that. Because let me ask you this, at your home, would you really want someone who's not a licensed electrician working on your house? Of course, you want someone who's a licensed electrician. Well, from a small business point of view, a medium size or a large business, wouldn't you rather that someone's qualified to come in and work on your computer system and make sure it's secure? So I think this is where we've got to start thinking in Australia about how we can really open it up and get rid of that that high entry bar that we've set.
Yeah, the conversation that we had originally came about from, we're talking about cybersecurity around resources and it being a profession. So when you think about a doctor, a lawyer, you get a license, and there's an adjudicating board that says that if you do X, Y, Z, or if there's an incident, it's investigated, and then therefore that stops your ability to be able to practice in that craft. And we're not at that point yet. And then the conversation went to what was happening with the army and how you're able to have a trade with that, which is kind of like the building blocks of where we're at. So I just thought it was an interesting conversation that we had as a side conversation that I thought would have been interesting to the community watching. So
definitely. And I think that licensing and regulatory side is quite important. And I know as an industry we've talked about it for years. And look, there's no doubt that there's some fantastic certification schemes out there in the industry. I'm a CISSP. I see that as a great benchmark for people within our profession, to show that you've got a certain level of, certainly knowledge. So I do think that there is a role for, state government and federal government to start playing more of a role in that space, so that, basically you're a licensed cybersecurity tradesperson. If you're going to have professional and be a member of a professional body, then I think you need to show that you've got the appropriate skills, knowledge, certification, and experience. I think the industry is going to need to build that trust more and more in that particular space, to know that the people that are in this space are actually doing a really good job. Because you know what, there was a time when electricity first came out and there wasn't electricians, right? But over time, an industry evolved and it turned into a trade and a profession. The same with plumbing. I mean, the Romans were the first ones allegedly to start building plumbing systems, but they weren't technically plumbers. So, we've got to think about that and, build that trust, but also attract a wider range of people into something that is a trade, and is a great career opportunity over the time, whether you're male or female, you live in outback rural Australia or you live in the big city.
Yeah, great. I think that's really great because it definitely starts to help streamline a bit as well, the expectations of what you expect out of an expert. And also it's easier for people to know. It helps them in their career path planning and it makes it a lot more, a sort of a centralized way of doing things. But we really need to have more conversations of this, keep raising awareness as well, and look at collaboration also with the educational sector so that we can actually do something about it, right? There is a question that came from the audience, in fact. So from Karina, she teaches students about cybersecurity and she has been really helping them to try to be more aware. The general feedback is that, they don't really know much. So it's quite a scary feeling. And she wants to hear from the panel what kind of advice anyone here in the panel would have for students or for teachers about how can they get into the industry as well. And she believes that the government should be pushing and advocating for this. So are there other ways or tips that you want to highlight that hasn't been addressed yet?
Real quick, and just mention that I love the conversation between Robert and Grae. And one thing that's happening a lot in the U.S. is we're seeing what we call cyber competitions. I don't know if they're big in Australia or not, but even in high school, and they're starting now in middle school. So, literally, kind of 10, 11 years old, competitions historically in the U.S. we would have, you know, these quiz buster things and these, you know, these different things about, you know, spelling and this and that. And basically cyber now is in there. So attack and defend, and it not just for technical people, but like people getting into clubs. And a lot, to answer the question, Shamane, from the audience, you know, teachers actually becoming part of that as well. And then schools competing against schools. We have a lot of that in the U.S., like in sports, but literally schools competing against each other. And then you're having a national, statewide competition, the national competition. And there are curriculums. We can't go through the whole thing right now, but certainly I can get you some information, Shamane, you can share with your audience, and whole guides on how to do this. It's publicly available, it's free, it's out there, but just how even teachers that maybe don't have a background in cybersecurity can help lead their team and literally hands-on practically defend and attack and really learn some of those basic cyber skills.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dan. I really love the exchange of knowledge sharing and practices across different countries. In Australia, we do have also like a security kit day. They have a competition and conference just for children, help them dabble their hands with security and get familiar. So there's a lot of good support that we are seeing. Rob, Grae, anything you want to add?
I was just so happy to hear Dan saying that there's competition between the individual schools, like as if there was in the different districts. Knowing I spent a little bit of time in the US and Canada as doing amateur wrestling, and I appreciate what that means with the different schools and that competing. So I'm just heartened by the fact that, you know, we do tend to follow a lot what happens in the US. So seeing what's happened in Israel, that there is a curriculum, hopefully becomes part of the HSC and even before then. So yeah, it's coming back to the curriculum statement.
Great. And Rob, I just want to go back to you as well, right? Because I think now we want to, in conscious of time, want to cover this part as well. I think it'll be good for the audience to hear from the panel. You know, what are some of your personal hiring experience when it comes to recruiting and tips that you can provide to potential candidates? And Rob, since you are very experienced from a CEO point of view, running many different businesses in the past, like can you share what do you look for then when it comes to whether is it hiring someone from the consulting space or auditing or the risk space?
Yeah. So when presented, usually you find that there's people will have their disciplines. Yeah. For example, if it was a technical person, you'll say, do you focus more on applications or infrastructure? If it was penetration testing, and then or you get someone that says that they say I do both, but they'll have a preference. The second one is that from the consulting side of things, to be able to make that distinction between an auditor and a consultant, and my core experience is that people that claim to be both generally are not. So the skills associated with a consultant means that you've had a lot of bloody knees because you've fallen over a number of times, and the client that needs that consulting advice is based on that grey hair that you have, or those bloody knees that you have because you've learned some lessons from other times. The audit profile of a person is that they've got their framework that they're actually adhering to. So there's a different level of discipline, which is based on experience. So in asking the questions, to be able to delineate between someone who is, say, from an auditing or from a consulting perspective, and knowing what their preference is and whether it's a good job fit is a pretty important skill to be able to get first up.
Thanks for sharing that, Rob. And Grae, from an end user point of view, do you want to add on anything about diversity?
Yeah, look, I'm always looking for, you know, that enthusiasm, that right attitude, that wanting to learn, you know, and that willingness to learn. Because, you know, when it comes down to, you know, even when I'm picking a candidate, if I might have someone who's got lots of experience, but then I might have someone who doesn't have that level of experience, but has the right attitude. Because you know what, we can often train people, but it's really hard to train the right attitude. So, you know, going back to a question from the audience earlier on, you know, it can be hard if you just coming out of school, you want to jump into cyber. And, you know, that's why I talked about, you know, we need a trade type scheme and things like that. And, you know, there's certainly a role for companies to do a lot more. And we as the, you know, the CISOs as considered the leaders in the industry, we do need to do a lot more. And we need to do a lot more outreach too. We need to get out there and talk in schools and TAFEs and things like that about cybersecurity, and it is a career, right? Also showing that it's a career that's suitable for, you know, doesn't matter what your racial background is, you know, or your ethnic background. It doesn't matter whether, you know, your sexual preferences, what type of sex you are, anything like that, right? We've got to encourage that diversity. And if people in the schools don't hear those messages from us as an industry, they're not going to be attracted to it. Okay, so we need to know that there is a support network out there in the, you know, the leadership of cybersecurity across our industry. That means that it is a real opportunity. Because let's face it, IT for a long time has been seen as a male-dominated industry, right? I mean, that's a fact. And a lot of work over the last 10 years, which has been very positive, has started to break that down a lot more. But we've got to get rid of that image. We've got to get rid of that image in IT, and certainly in security as well. We don't want to have that image. But, you know, going back to it, you know what? I'm looking for attitude. So, you know what? If you're, you know, just getting qualified or want a career in cybersecurity, think about how you're going to come over when you do that interview. You know, make sure that you're really coming out about your passion and show it, because I look for it too. When I look at a CV, if I see something that's showing passion, you know, they've been part of a security association, or they've been doing volunteer work and helping out in some organization doing some cybersecurity, then I see that these are people that take initiative, and they're the people you want on your team.
Oh, I love that. Exactly. And when it comes to cybersecurity, it's about having a curious mindset at the end of the day. And you need to be driven, right? To learn, you're passionate. I've seen a lot, you know, beyond just background, racial or gender, there's a lot of merit also to people who comes from different backgrounds, like political science. I've seen lawyers coming into cybersecurity industry, journalists, education, like mathematicians as well. So it's a beautiful industry that we're in, and everybody, you know, plays a part in that. And that's something that one of our audience also just added. Ashley, she was saying that she's a cybersecurity student. She's really encouraged to hear from the panel that, you know, there's not just one standard way to break through into the sector. So we have unfortunately ran out of time. As I said before, we can go on forever because there's a lot to talk about, but I really hope this session is useful for the audience. So I just want to thank Rob again for all your time, for Grae for sharing all your great insights, Dan for joining us all the way from the US, and it's late for him. You know, thank you so much, panel. Thank you so much, audience. Really happy to be part of this community segment. And back to you, all cyber. For the rest who wants to connect with us, you know, feel free to check us out also on LinkedIn, podcast, Cyber Risk Meetup group page. But other than that, it's a pleasure. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And remember, don't chase money, chase happiness in a cyber career, okay? Because money will chase you, but happiness won't. So do that, folks.
Oh, fantastic. Perfect.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.